She called me replaceable after I refused to fund her $8,000 vacation with another man. I'd been supporting Riley's influencer dreams for 18 months, watching her spend my money like it was an endless fountain while she built what she called her brand. That night changed everything between us, and I realized she was absolutely right about one thing. If I was replaceable, then so was everything I provided. I'm Owen, a financial analyst living in Phoenix, Arizona, and I thought I'd found someone worth investing in when I met Riley at a coffee shop downtown 2 years ago. She was this vibrant woman with big dreams, working as a museum coordinator but constantly talking about her passion for travel photography and building a social media presence. Back then, she seemed genuinely passionate about art and culture, sharing stories about the exhibitions she curated and the artists she worked with. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself drawn to her creative energy and ambition. When she quit her job 18 months into our relationship to pursue becoming a full-time travel influencer, I supported her decision both emotionally and financially, covering our rent at the luxury Scottsdale apartment in the entertainment district, her car lease on a Tesla Model X that she claimed was essential for her image, and basically every expense while she focused on creating content. I believed in her dreams, maybe more than she believed in them herself, thinking that my stable income could provide the foundation she needed to build something meaningful. Those first few months seemed promising. She was posting regularly, gaining followers, partnering with local hotels and restaurants for sponsored content. I watched her light up when brands started reaching out for collaborations, even small ones, and I felt proud to be supporting someone chasing their passion. The problem started when she met Dante at a business mixer 3 months ago, this flashy cryptocurrency trader who drove different exotic cars every week and constantly posted about his supposedly lavish lifestyle on Instagram. Riley became obsessed, showing me his posts constantly, talking about his investment strategies, his expensive watches, his trips to Dubai and Monaco that she claimed were just smart business networking. She started comparing everything in our life to what Dante had, making comments about how some men really knew how to live and weren't afraid to take risks with their money. I watched her slowly transform from someone grateful for stability into someone who saw my steady income and conservative financial approach as boring and limiting. Her content began changing too, becoming less about genuine travel experiences and more about flaunting luxury items and expensive locations, always with subtle hints about wanting to upgrade her lifestyle. She started dropping hints about needing better equipment, a bigger social media budget, access to more exclusive events and locations. The breaking point came when she announced she wanted to take a trip to Cabo with Dante and some other influencers, expecting me to fund the $8,000 cost because it would be great content for her Instagram and help her build connections in the industry. She presented it like a business investment, showing me analytics about engagement rates and potential sponsorship opportunities, but something about the way she talked about Dante and this trip felt different, more personal than professional. When I pointed out that I wasn't comfortable paying for her vacation with another man, especially someone she'd been talking about obsessively for months, she exploded with a fury I'd never seen before. She told me I was holding her back, that I was small-minded and jealous, that any real man would support his woman's dreams without question or insecurity. Then came the words that cut deepest, that I was replaceable, that she had 10 other men who would treat her like the queen she deserved to be, that Dante had already offered to pay for everything if I wasn't man enough to step up. She went on about how I was just a boring financial analyst who would never understand her creative vision, how she needed someone who matched her energy and ambition, how she was tired of settling for my safe, predictable lifestyle. I sat there listening to her rant about how pathetic my life was, how boring our relationship had become, how she deserved someone who could match her ambition and vision for the future, someone who wasn't afraid to spend money to make money. Something clicked in my mind as I watched her pace around our expensive apartment, wearing designer clothes I'd paid for, talking about how easily she could replace me while demanding I fund her romantic getaway with my replacement. The irony was almost laughable. She was calling me replaceable while living entirely off my income, driving a car I leased, sleeping in a bed I purchased, in an apartment I rented. I realized she didn't see me as her partner, her boyfriend, or even a person. I was a financial resource to be exploited until something better came along. So I calmly told her she was absolutely right, that if I was replaceable, then everything I provided was equally replaceable, and maybe it was time for her to find out exactly what life looked like without her personal ATM. The look on her face shifted from anger to confusion to something that might have been fear, but I was already mentally checking out of the conversation and planning my exit strategy. I took 3 days off work and executed the most methodical breakup in modern history, treating it like the financial restructuring projects I handled for clients who needed to cut their losses quickly and efficiently. Riley had stormed out that night to stay with Dante, probably expecting me to spend the time thinking about what I'd lost and come crawling back with apologies and promises to fund her Cabo trip, but instead I spent those 72 hours systematically removing her from every aspect of my financial life. The first step was terminating our luxury apartment lease in Scottsdale's entertainment district, which meant paying hefty early termination fees that cost me nearly $4,000, but I considered it a bargain compared to continuing to subsidize someone who saw me as nothing more than a human credit card. I contacted the leasing office early Tuesday morning, explained that I needed to break the lease immediately due to changed circumstances, and wrote a check that same day to cover all penalties and remaining obligations. Next came the Tesla Model X that Riley claimed was essential for her influencer image but hadn't made a single payment on since I took over the lease 8 months ago when her temporary cash flow issues became permanent. I drove straight to the dealership, returned the vehicle, and handled all the paperwork to remove my name from the lease agreement, leaving Riley without her precious status symbol and primary means of transportation. The look of surprise on the sales manager's face when I explained I was returning a car that someone else had been driving was almost amusing, especially when he mentioned how attached people usually got to their luxury vehicles. While I was at the dealership, I used my phone to transfer every penny from our joint checking and savings accounts into my personal accounts, watching years of my hard work and careful saving flow back to where it belonged. Riley had access to these accounts but had never contributed a single dollar to them, treating them like her personal shopping fund while I deposited my entire paycheck each month and watched it disappear on designer clothes, expensive dinners, and whatever trendy gadgets she claimed she needed for her content creation. I also discovered some interesting evidence of her relationship with Dante while cleaning out the Tesla. A distinctive cologne scent that definitely wasn't mine lingered in the passenger seat, along with a receipt from an expensive jewelry store tucked under the floor mat and a business card for a private club that I'd never heard of but clearly cost more to join than most people's annual salary. The cologne was the same brand I'd seen Dante wearing in his Instagram posts, a $500 bottle that he'd made sure to feature prominently in several photos, and finding traces of it in Riley's car confirmed what I'd already suspected about the true nature of their business relationship. I checked into a boutique hotel in downtown Phoenix, paying cash for a month-long stay in a suite that overlooked the city skyline, and for the first time in 18 months I felt like I could breathe freely without calculating how much money would disappear from my accounts by the end of the week. The silence in that hotel room was golden, no constant requests for money, no complaints about our boring lifestyle, no endless scrolling through Dante's social media with pointed comments about how some men really knew how to live. I ordered room service without worrying about whether Riley would approve of my choice or demand we go somewhere more expensive and Instagram-worthy instead. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally living the kind of lifestyle Riley claimed to want, staying in luxury accommodations and eating high-end food, but I was doing it alone and with money that was actually mine to spend. Over those 3 days, I also took care of blocking Riley on every social media platform, every messaging app, and changing my phone number to ensure she couldn't reach out when she inevitably realized what had happened. I'd built my wealth through disciplined investing, living below my means, and making smart financial decisions for over 6 years since graduating college, starting as an entry-level analyst and working my way up to a senior position that paid well into 6 figures, but somehow I'd let one person drain my accounts faster than I could fill them. My background was in helping businesses cut unprofitable divisions and streamline their operations for better performance, so applying those same principles to my personal life felt natural, even if the unprofitable division in this case happened to be the woman I'd thought I loved. Riley spent 3 blissful days at Dante's place, completely unaware that her entire world was collapsing while she was probably posting Instagram stories about living her best life and finally being with someone who understood her worth. I imagined her showing off Dante's apartment, his cars, maybe even hinting about their upcoming Cabo trip to make her followers jealous, completely oblivious to the fact that she no longer had access to any of the financial resources that had been funding her lifestyle for the past 18 months. She was probably basking in what she thought was her triumphant escape from my boring, predictable life, finally free to pursue the luxury lifestyle she deserved with someone who appreciated her properly. The reality hit her Friday night when she went out for dinner with her influencer friends at one of those trendy Scottsdale restaurants where a single appetizer costs more than most people spend on groceries in a week, the kind of place she dragged me to countless times while complaining that I never took her anywhere nice enough for her image. I can only imagine the scene when her credit card got declined, then the backup card, then the third one, all of them connected to accounts that no longer had my money flowing into them like an endless river of financial support. According to mutual friends who witnessed the spectacle, Riley's face went white when she realized she couldn't even cover her share of a $600 dinner bill, let alone the drinks and appetizers she'd ordered with her usual careless abandon, treating money like it was infinite because it always had been in her experience. The panic in her eyes must have been obvious to everyone at the table as she frantically checked her phone, trying to access banking apps and finding empty accounts where substantial balances used to exist, discovering for the first time what financial reality actually looked like. Her friends had to cover her portion of the bill, which was humiliating enough for someone who'd spent months positioning herself as this successful influencer with expensive tastes and high standards, but the real shock came when she tried to go home and discovered that the key card to our Scottsdale apartment building no longer worked. I pictured her standing there in the lobby at midnight, probably still wearing whatever designer outfit she'd chosen to impress her dinner companions, repeatedly tapping her key card against the reader and getting nothing but rejection beeps in response. The Tesla was gone too, disappeared from its usual spot in the covered parking garage like it had never existed, which meant she was stranded without transportation and had to call an Uber she couldn't afford just to get back to Dante's place while her friends watched this public breakdown of her carefully curated lifestyle. I heard through our mutual friend network that she spent the next 2 days frantically calling everyone we knew, trying to track me down, but I'd already informed the few people who mattered that I was taking a temporary break from social situations and didn't want to be contacted about anything related to Riley or our relationship. She tried reaching out to my coworkers, my gym buddies, even my neighbor in the old apartment building, growing more desperate with each dead end and probably spinning increasingly dramatic stories about why she needed to reach me so urgently. The desperation in her voice apparently grew more obvious with each failed attempt to locate me, and by Sunday she was offering people money she didn't have just to get my new phone number or hotel information, promising to pay them back once she sorted things out with me. What really drove home her complete financial dependence was discovering that she had less than $300 in her personal checking account, money that had been sitting there untouched for months because she'd been using my funds for everything from coffee to rent to her designer wardrobe that she claimed was essential for her brand. She'd never developed any real financial skills or independence during our relationship, never had to budget or plan or think about where money actually came from, because there had always been my steady paycheck covering every expense and desire without question or hesitation. Riley had been living like someone with unlimited resources while contributing absolutely nothing to the household income, treating my bank account like her personal trust fund, and suddenly finding herself truly on her own for the first time in over a year must have been absolutely terrifying. The friends who covered her dinner bill weren't about to become her new financial supporters, especially after seeing how quickly she'd burned through whatever money she'd had access to and witnessing firsthand her complete inability to function without someone else's financial backing. Her social media following wasn't exactly the type that sent cash donations to struggling influencers, and the brands she'd been hoping to partner with required consistent, high-quality content that was impossible to create without the resources I'd been providing. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and pity imagining her scrolling through her Instagram posts from just a few days earlier, all those photos of luxury items and expensive experiences, realizing that none of it had actually been hers and that the lifestyle she'd been flaunting was about to disappear completely. The woman who'd called me replaceable was discovering that replacing someone isn't the same as replacing what they provide, and that Dante's willingness to pay for a Cabo vacation didn't necessarily extend to covering her daily living expenses or long-term financial security. Riley moved in with Dante, expecting him to seamlessly replace me as her financial provider, probably imagining herself living in some luxury penthouse surrounded by all the expensive toys he flaunted on social media, but reality has a way of crushing even the most elaborate fantasies. Instead of the glamorous lifestyle she'd been promised, she discovered that Dante lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Tempe with two roommates who were getting increasingly annoyed by her presence and constant demands for privacy and special treatment that disrupted their established living arrangements. The exotic cars he drove weren't owned but leased or borrowed from friends in his cryptocurrency trading circle, part of an elaborate performance designed to attract investors and women who were impressed by displays of wealth that didn't actually exist in any meaningful form. His apartment was decent but nothing like the luxury accommodations Riley had grown accustomed to during our relationship, featuring basic furniture from discount retailers and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s, certainly not the backdrop for the Instagram lifestyle content she'd been planning to create. Sharing space with two other guys who worked normal jobs and split utilities 3 ways was a far cry from the pampered lifestyle she'd been living on my dime, especially when they expected her to contribute to household expenses and chores instead of being treated like a visiting princess who required special accommodations. Dante's wealth, it turned out, was largely fabricated through creative financing and social media illusion, the kind of house of cards financial structure that looked impressive from the outside but collapsed under any real scrutiny or sustained financial pressure. His cryptocurrency investments had been failing for months, losing money consistently while he posted about diamond hands and riding the wave to financial freedom, and he'd been borrowing money from credit cards and friends to maintain his flashy image while desperately hoping that one big trade would turn everything around and make him actually wealthy instead of just appearing wealthy on Instagram. The expensive watches were high-quality replicas bought from overseas suppliers who specialized in fooling people at social events. The designer clothes were knockoffs purchased in bulk from the same factories that made the real versions, and the trips to Dubai and Monaco had been carefully staged photo shoots during brief visits funded by maxed-out credit cards rather than actual business success or sustainable income. When Riley started pressuring him about the Cabo trip they discussed and suggesting they move to a nicer place together without his annoying roommates who didn't understand her need for proper lighting and quiet space for content creation, Dante realized he couldn't continue the charade much longer without serious financial backing from someone else. He'd been hoping to use Riley's social media following to attract more investors to his cryptocurrency schemes and trading courses, but her follower count wasn't nearly as valuable as he'd initially thought, especially when most of her audience was other aspiring influencers with no money to invest in his dubious trading strategies or lifestyle coaching programs. The breaking point came when Riley demanded that he cover her basic living expenses the way I had, expecting him to pay for her food, clothes, entertainment, and personal care while she focused on rebuilding her influencer brand that had taken a serious hit from her sudden lifestyle downgrade and inability to maintain her previous content quality. She presented him with a detailed breakdown of her monthly expenses, probably the first budget she'd ever created, showing nearly $4,000 in costs for everything from organic groceries to professional photography services, nail appointments, and designer clothing that she claimed was essential for maintaining her brand image. Dante sat her down after less than a week and explained that his financial situation wasn't as stable as he'd led her to believe, suggesting she find her own place and maybe look for actual employment instead of relying on social media success that might never materialize into real income or sustainable career prospects. The conversation apparently didn't go well, with Riley accusing him of false advertising and manipulation, which was ironic considering she'd been manipulating me for financial support while emotionally cheating with him for months before finally making her move. Their relationship crumbled faster than a poorly constructed cryptocurrency portfolio, lasting barely 10 days from her moving in to her storming out with whatever belongings she could carry, leaving behind the fantasy of the luxurious lifestyle she thought she deserved with someone who truly understood her worth. Riley ended up staying with her friend Jessica in a cramped studio apartment near Arizona State University, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room and facing the harsh reality that none of her friends were willing or able to provide the financial support she'd grown accustomed to receiving from me without question or reciprocation. Jessica was a graduate student working part-time at a coffee shop, living paycheck to paycheck, and definitely not equipped to support someone with Riley's expensive tastes and complete aversion to actual work or financial responsibility. The contrast between Riley's old life and her new circumstances was stark and probably devastating to someone who'd built her entire identity around appearing successful and living lavishly, suddenly finding herself couch surfing and borrowing money for basic necessities like toiletries and food. 2 weeks after Riley's world collapsed, she tracked me down at my financial firm's office building in downtown Phoenix, probably after exhausting every other option and swallowing whatever pride she had left to make this desperate final attempt at reconciliation. I was walking out of the lobby after another successful day at work when I spotted her sitting on a bench across the street, looking like she'd been waiting there for hours in the Arizona heat, her usually perfect appearance replaced by something that could only be described as disheveled desperation. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of the carefully styled waves she used to spend an hour creating each morning with professional products that cost more than most people's grocery budgets. Her makeup was minimal and slightly smudged around the edges, and she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before that looked like they'd come from a discount retailer rather than the boutique stores she used to frequent with my credit card. The designer handbag was gone, replaced by a worn canvas tote that probably belonged to Jessica, and her entire demeanor screamed of someone who'd been humbled by circumstances beyond her control and was finally ready to face the reality of adult responsibility. When she saw me, she jumped up and hurried across the street with an urgency that would have been flattering if I hadn't known it was motivated purely by financial desperation rather than any genuine desire to reconnect with me as a person she valued and respected. She started crying before she even reached me, tears that looked real for the first time in our entire relationship, not the manipulative waterworks she used to turn on when she wanted something expensive but actual distress from someone who'd hit rock bottom and was running out of options or people willing to help her. She launched into this elaborate apology about how she'd made a terrible mistake, how her harsh words during our fight had just been stress talking, how she'd never really meant any of it and had been confused about what she actually wanted from life and relationships in general. The performance was almost convincing, with her voice cracking at all the right moments and her body language conveying the kind of vulnerability she'd never shown me when we were together, but I could see through it to the calculation underneath, the strategic deployment of emotions designed to achieve a specific outcome rather than genuine remorse or self-reflection. She told me she truly loved me and had realized that during our time apart, though she was careful to frame it as loving me rather than loving the lifestyle I'd provided, probably having rehearsed this conversation multiple times to avoid seeming too obviously mercenary in her motivations. When I remained completely unmoved by her tears and apologies, maintaining the same calm expression I used during difficult client meetings, she shifted tactics and started talking about how much she missed us, our relationship, our future plans, all the things we'd built together that she'd thrown away in a moment of temporary insanity caused by Dante's manipulation. The irony was incredible. She was talking about missing our relationship to the same person she'd told was replaceable, apparently expecting me to forget that conversation ever happened or pretend it hadn't revealed exactly how she really felt about me as a human being rather than a financial resource. I let her talk for several minutes, watching her cycle through different emotional appeals and manipulation techniques like someone flipping through a playbook, before finally responding with the kind of calm detachment that clearly wasn't what she'd expected or prepared for in her desperate planning sessions. I pointed out that she didn't miss me or our relationship, she missed the financial security and lifestyle I'd provided, and that her sudden realization of love had coincidentally occurred right around the time she discovered that Dante couldn't replace what I'd been giving her for 18 months without question. She tried to protest, claiming it wasn't about money and that she'd learned to value the right things during her time away, but when I mentioned that she was welcome to contact any of those 10 men she'd claimed would treat her like a queen, her face went pale and she fell silent for the first time since approaching me. The truth was obvious. Those men either didn't exist or had proven just as unwilling as Dante to fund her lifestyle without getting something substantial in return, leaving her with the harsh reality that finding a long-term financial provider was much more difficult than she'd assumed when she was confidently declaring my replaceability. When she asked if she could stay at my hotel temporarily, just until she got back on her feet and found a job, I almost laughed at the transparent nature of her request, especially since getting back on her feet apparently didn't involve taking any personal responsibility for the situation she'd created through her own choices and actions. I reminded her of her confident declaration about having multiple options and suggested she reach out to one of them instead of crawling back to someone she'd discarded so easily when she thought she'd found something better and more exciting. The conversation ended with me walking away while she called after me, her voice growing more desperate and shrill as the distance between us increased, probably realizing that her manipulation tactics weren't working and that she'd burned this bridge more thoroughly than she'd understood when she was busy calling me replaceable and boring. Over the following 8 months, my life transformed in ways I hadn't expected, flourishing without the constant financial drain and emotional stress of supporting someone who saw me as nothing more than a human ATM with good credit and steady employment. At work, I excelled like never before, no longer distracted by Riley's constant demands for money or her complaints about our supposedly boring lifestyle, and my performance caught the attention of senior management who offered me a promotion to portfolio manager with a substantial salary increase and additional responsibilities. The promotion came with a corner office, a team of junior analysts to manage, and the kind of professional recognition I'd been working toward for years but had been too stressed and financially stretched to properly pursue while funding Riley's influencer fantasies and expensive lifestyle demands. I moved into a modern downtown Phoenix condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, a place I could actually afford comfortably on my new salary without worrying about someone else's expensive tastes draining my accounts faster than I could fill them with honest work and careful planning. The condo had everything I'd always wanted but couldn't justify while supporting Riley's lifestyle: a home office with proper equipment and multiple monitors for analyzing market trends, a kitchen with high-end appliances I actually used instead of eating out constantly, and most importantly, the peace and quiet to enjoy my success without constant requests for money or complaints about not living luxuriously enough to impress her social media followers. It was around this time that I met Carmen at a coffee shop near my office, a dedicated elementary school teacher who insisted on paying for her own drink despite my offer to cover it, immediately setting a tone of independence and mutual respect that felt refreshing after years of one-sided financial responsibility and entitled expectations. Carmen was the complete opposite of Riley in every way that mattered. She had her own career that she was passionate about and took seriously, her own financial goals that she worked toward consistently through careful budgeting and smart spending decisions, and her own sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on expensive possessions or social media validation from strangers who didn't actually know her. Our first few dates were a revelation in what a healthy relationship could look like, with Carmen suggesting affordable activities that we both enjoyed like hiking trails around Phoenix and visiting free museums, splitting checks without making it a political statement about gender roles or financial expectations, and showing genuine interest in my work and goals rather than just calculating how much money I made and what that could provide for her. She drove a reliable Honda Civic that she'd bought used and maintained carefully with regular service appointments, lived in a modest apartment that reflected her teacher's salary but was decorated thoughtfully with books and artwork that showed her personality, and somehow managed to be more genuinely attractive and interesting than Riley had ever been despite spending a fraction of the money on her appearance and wardrobe. Carmen's independence wasn't just financial but emotional as well. She had her own friends from work and college who she maintained relationships with, her own hobbies like pottery and reading that didn't require expensive equipment or social media documentation, her own dreams of eventually becoming a principal that didn't require someone else's money to fund through connections or expensive networking events. She seemed genuinely confused when I mentioned how refreshing it was to date someone who didn't expect me to pay for everything, asking if that was really something women did regularly, which made me realize how abnormal my relationship with Riley had actually been compared to healthy adult partnerships. When I told her about Riley and the financial dynamics of that relationship, Carmen was shocked that anyone would expect their partner to fund their entire lifestyle without contribution, especially while simultaneously complaining that the relationship was boring and the financial provider was replaceable with someone more exciting or wealthy. We started spending more time together, building something based on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than financial dependence or transactional expectations, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations about her students, her teaching methods, and her plans for professional development rather than dreading requests for money or complaints about our lifestyle not being Instagram-worthy enough. Carmen appreciated the small gestures I made, bringing her coffee during particularly stressful weeks with difficult students or demanding parents, helping her move some furniture when she upgraded to a slightly larger apartment, taking her to nice restaurants occasionally as genuine treats rather than expected weekly obligations, because they were genuine expressions of care rather than expected financial obligations that she took for granted. Meanwhile, through our mutual friend network, I heard occasional updates about Riley's struggles that painted a picture of someone learning harsh lessons about adult responsibility and financial independence for the first time in her adult life at 26 years old. The final chapter of this story unfolded at a high-end charity fundraiser at the Phoenix Art Museum, one of those events where successful professionals network while supporting local causes, the kind of gathering I could now attend comfortably thanks to my promotion and newfound financial freedom from supporting someone else's expensive lifestyle. Carmen and I had been dating for 6 months by then, and she looked absolutely stunning in an elegant black dress that she'd bought herself for the occasion, wearing a delicate gold necklace I'd given her for her birthday that complemented her natural beauty without screaming expensive the way Riley's accessories always had to announce their price tags to the world. We were discussing the silent auction items and planning our bids when I spotted a familiar figure across the crowded gallery space, working behind the catering station and looking exhausted in a way that went beyond the normal tiredness of a long shift serving wealthy patrons at charity events. Riley was there as part of the catering staff, wearing the standard black and white uniform that all the servers had on, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that was practical rather than stylish, and she looked like she'd aged several years in the 8 months since our confrontation outside my office building where she'd begged for another chance. The confident, entitled woman who used to demand expensive dinners and designer clothes had been replaced by someone who looked worn down by the reality of working multiple jobs just to cover basic living expenses, and the contrast was striking enough that I almost didn't recognize her at first glance across the museum's elegant interior. She was refilling champagne glasses and clearing empty plates with the kind of mechanical efficiency that comes from doing the same tasks repeatedly for hours at minimum wage plus tips, probably thinking about hourly wages and bus schedules instead of Instagram followers and brand partnerships, a complete reversal from the lifestyle she'd once taken for granted while living off my income. When she looked up from arranging appetizers on a serving tray, our eyes met across the room for just a moment, and I saw her face cycle through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise at seeing me in this upscale setting, embarrassment at being caught in her current circumstances, what might have been shame about how far she'd fallen from her previous lifestyle, and then a kind of resignation that suggested she'd been dreading this exact scenario but knew it was inevitable in a city like Phoenix where professional circles eventually overlap. Riley quickly looked away and retreated toward the kitchen area, probably hoping to avoid any direct interaction that might lead to awkward conversation or recognition from other guests who might have known us as a couple, but the damage was already done in terms of the stark visual comparison between where we'd both ended up after our relationship ended so dramatically. Carmen noticed my distraction and followed my gaze with the intuitive awareness that comes from genuinely caring about someone, immediately understanding the situation without needing detailed explanation about who Riley was or what our history had been, and her reaction was one of genuine sympathy rather than the satisfaction or vindication that some people might have felt in similar circumstances. She squeezed my hand gently and suggested we move to a different part of the gallery to look at the contemporary art collection, not because she was uncomfortable with the situation but because she could see that I needed a moment to process this unexpected encounter with my past and the woman who had once called me replaceable. I felt surprisingly little emotion looking at Riley in her current situation, not anger at how she treated me, not satisfaction at her obvious struggles, not even pity for someone who was clearly working hard to survive, just a kind of detached observation of how different our paths had become since she'd declared me boring and walked away to chase what she thought would be a better life with someone more exciting. The woman who had once confidently told me about the 10 men who would treat her like a queen was now working catering events for people like me, probably earning in a month what she used to spend on a single shopping trip when my credit card was funding her lifestyle and enabling her to live like someone with unlimited resources. Carmen and I continued enjoying the fundraiser, bidding on a weekend getaway package to Sedona that we won together and would use to celebrate her summer break from teaching, the kind of shared experience that Riley would never have appreciated because it wasn't expensive enough or impressive enough for her social media image and wouldn't generate the kind of content that attracted followers. Throughout the evening, I occasionally glimpsed Riley working diligently in the background, maintaining her professional demeanor despite what must have been a humbling experience serving drinks and appetizers to the kind of people she used to consider her peers when she was living off someone else's success. The encounter was brief and wordless, with Riley efficiently doing her job and avoiding any situation that might lead to awkward conversation, probably understanding that approaching me would be inappropriate given the professional setting and the clear evidence of how well I was doing without her constant financial demands and emotional manipulation.